I always had one foot in that show business world, you know. Have done some stuff in the world of show business a little bit, hosted some big network shows and been in some movies with little roles and all this kind of thing. But I always felt I was just kind of peering into show business from the outside. We are about to talk to someone who is truly, he is show business. His family is show business. The world of Norman Brokaw, his father, was inhabited by the greatest names in all of show business. And he's written a book about it. How about it? For the son of Norman Brokaw, I don't think he'll mind me introducing him that way. Joel Brokaw, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Your dad, Norman Brokaw, legendary Hollywood agent, and indeed you've written the book about the life and times of legendary Hollywood agent Norman Brokaw. He, if there's a Mount Rushmore for talent agents, he'd be maybe one of the first faces up there. Can explain to everyone and give us the snapshot in time. Then I've got a ton of questions for you.
Sure.
But in a short time. But give us the snapshot in time of Norman Brokaw, your father's show business world. Who was hot at the time? What was the state of the state then?
Well, I think if you look back on the last half of the 20th century, you would find Norman Brokaw's fingerprints on almost every major development in our cultural history. And so he was at the William Morris Agency. And during that time period, the epicenter of the entertainment world ran through their building. So he lucked out. He was in a moment of time in which there was great transition in the business, going from radio, from vaudeville to radio, and then onto something that he played a major role on that they called television. And
he started in the mailroom, right, Joel?
That's correct. He was the first trainee in the William Morris mailroom in Los Angeles, in Beverly Hills to be exact. And no one had ever had the job before, and many have had the job since. And many a mogul has cut their teeth in that mailroom, including David Geffen, who wrote the foreword to the book.
Yeah, the mailroom to super agent route has now been talked about. It's a storied mythology that's grown up around that route. Your father was the one who really made that mythology happen.
That's right. And the funny thing is that my father was eternally grateful for the opportunity that he had to be in that mailroom. And, you know, you can look at him being what Berry Gordy of Motown, he called my father the secret driving force behind all of us who were fortunate to have him in our lives. But the funny thing was, as with all the mega people that my father worked with, he just loved talent. And he loved the talent in the mailroom. And so many people are grateful to my father because he was someone that the door was always open. He always had advice, and he wanted to pay back. He wanted to pay it forward, what he was given in his life.
So your book, which chronicles so much of this and beyond, Driving Marilyn, the life and times of legendary Hollywood agent Norman Brokaw, takes us through so many of these experiences. Explain why you call the book Driving Marilyn.
Well, because one of the first things that he did as a junior agent was to drive Marilyn Monroe to her auditions, which were for jobs that were at the SAG minimum of $55. And so his uncle, Johnny Hyde, was a major agent in the business at the time. And he took Marilyn under his wings. She was his paramour and his protege. But Johnny Hyde had a very serious heart condition, and he couldn't go out and be on the town with Marilyn, take her to premieres, take her to important meetings. So my father was recruited to do that. And my father got the job, which is explained in the book, through his uncle. So nepotism was alive and well, but my father from day one wanted to prove, you know, he got his foot in the door and he wanted to prove himself. and he never stopped proving himself in it. But basically, one of the great stories in the book is when my father drove Marilyn to a talent program called Lights, Camera, and Action that was done on Vine Street. And it was a way to showcase her to all the talent agents who watched this live television show. And he would also get a piece of tape, or in the film, I should say, kinescope, to show to other casting people. So they did that, and Norman said to Marilyn, let's go and have a bite. So they walked down the block to the Brown Derby, which was the place to be seen, and it didn't take long before they were seen. So Bill Frawley, who played Fred Mertz in I Love Lucy, walked over to the table and said hello to my father. My father introduced Marilyn Monroe and said, this is a young lady we really believe in named Marilyn Monroe. But then Bill Frawley cut to the chase, and he said, I'm having dinner with Joe D, and he would like to meet the young lady. So anyway, so he said, we'll stop by your table on our way out. Well, my father and Marilyn finished their meal first and walked over to the table. I should say also that my father warned Marilyn that that Joe DiMaggio was probably going to call him for her phone number. And she didn't have a problem with that, but she was a little perplexed. She said, who is Joe D? So Norman had to explain that he was on that Mount Rushmore of baseball players. And so, we all know how the story ended, which was not a good story, but my father gave Joe DiMaggio a piece of advice that cemented a lifelong friendship. And I could tell it to you now, or you can.
Well, no, you must. Well, you must. You can't leave us hanging there. Okay. I promise you we'll still get the book. Go ahead. Okay. Yeah.
So anyway, so the classic, my father had a way of cutting to the chase. He was a man, he was a wordsmith that way. He could pack as much content into a short sentence, get the point home. So Joe DiMaggio was upset because Marilyn was putting her career before their home life. And so my father said to him, I don't know of a woman who could get you to stop going up to the plate to hit in your 57th game. And I don't know of a man who could stop a woman from having a leading role with Clark Gable or Spencer Tracy. And the light bulb went off for Joe DiMaggio. He credited that advice for keeping their marriage alive a little bit longer and for the enduring love that they had.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it was one of those great love stories, even though the relationship didn't work out. And, it's interesting, not to get too far afield here, but Marilyn Monroe in other ways was sort of a cautionary tale, right? I mean, she was valued for her talents, for her beauty, for her symbolic beauty at a time of war. She was sort of viewed as one of those poster women. It was, a tumultuous time, and I feel like she was part of that tumult, and she got passed around Hollywood. I feel, Joel, kind of like a, like a party favor. Yeah,
I mean, this was long before the Me Too era, obviously, and I mean, even Bill Frawley coming up to almost pimp for Joe DiMaggio. You could look at that and say, well, that was a different time. But, a lot of the people who had superstardom did not always end up in the right place. And that was the thing. My father was very, very passionate about talent, and was like George Slaughter, who started Laugh-In, the producer of Laugh-In, talked to me about my father, and he said that he was an agent, a manager, a lawyer, accountant, and psychiatrist.
Sure.
So that's what he needed. He was a full service operation to bolster these very fragile egos.
Sure. And he had to be good at all of those things. And we start with Marilyn because that's the title of the book, Driving Marilyn. But his client list was just the envy of all talent reps. I mean,
absolutely. Right? One of the things that I learned in writing the book, which I didn't know, because my father was very tight-lipped. He was a keeper of secrets. If you asked him about anything critical about one of his clients, he would change the subject really quickly. But the kind of people he worked with, like I learned that Elvis Presley, for example, any offers coming into the William Morris agency for Elvis Presley had to go to my father. That was the trust that Elvis and Colonel Parker had in him. So he also represented people like Natalie Wood and Clint Eastwood, Kim Novak, Donna Summer, Loretta Young, Bill Cosby, Danny Thomas. You know, the list just goes on and on.
When did your dad stop his work?
Well, he would say that retirement is not in my vocabulary, but he ended up getting dementia. And so it was one of those things where he would say, I'm going into the office today. And he would go into his closet and look at his suits, and then he would go back to bed. So if he had not got dementia, he would probably still be going into the office. And in fact, today, on this day when my book is being released, is also the day that he passed away 8 years ago.
Oh, so, my gosh.
So it's kind of a fitting memorial to him.
Indeed. Indeed. I mean, the business has changed so much. And then you and your brother, from what we understand and you share with readers, you too went into the family business. You want to think of it that way. I mean, you too went into talent rep. Explain sort of that there was a true changing, and we see it happening almost with this momentum. It's hard to keep up with the changes in show business, in Hollywood, and talent rep. The people who are talent, Joel. I mean, it's you wouldn't think of a social media influencer as perhaps more important than a movie star, but they sometimes can weigh in and at the same weight.
Well, I think my father, he had a very positive attitude about change. He felt like if you wanted to stop time and rested on your laurels, that the ship was going to pass you by, to mix my metaphors. But he always saw possibilities in change. And I was thinking about him last night and saying, well, how would he be dealing with the tumultuous changes in the industry right now, and the chaos of the industry? And I would still say that he would still land with all of his four paws down on the earth, because he was always looking for possibilities where other people saw limitations. And that's why he was the first agent to sign a sitting president to an agency contract and to sign an Olympic gold medalist in Mark Spitz. So it was Gerald Ford and his family and Mark Spitz. And an agent would never contemplate doing that. But my father had a vision about that. And those things have become now very commonplace.
Sure. In fact, your dad is someone who I think he, as you say, straddled so many different periods when it came into show business. That's what makes him such a fascinating figure. And I see the way in which, as you've just sort of alluded to, these public figures, politicians, athletes, etc., have now just crossed into all of these different areas. It used to be, as your dad was representing so many, he was perhaps aware of the way that television, in fact, he was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was a big believer in television. I mean, your television wasn't exactly embraced by everyone when it first came out.
Absolutely. And he thought he was being demoted when his boss, Abe Lasvogel, asked him to head the newfangled television department. And at that point, hardly anybody had a television at home. And my father was given a TV, which was the size of a like big piece of furniture.
Yeah, they were huge.
And the neighbors would come over and they couldn't sit on the sofa. They'd have to crowd around it. And what did you have on the TV was Bowling for Dollars, newscasts. They would have variety shows and maybe a play that would be filmed live. But my father said, well, what am I supposed to do, Mr. Lasvogel? And he says, I leave that up to you. And so what he did essentially was he rounded up a whole bunch of known actors who maybe weren't so hot at the time. And he rounded up a lot of directors who were the B-movie 10-day wonder directors and put them together And those were the first dramatic television series like Racket Squad and so on and so on. And those set the table for television to be something more than just, sticking a camera in a room and see what happens. So that was the first step. But then the next challenge was that the people who had a name in motion pictures, they looked down upon television. Like that would be stepping down in their minds. And so he convinced Loretta Young to go on to television, and he was very clever in doing so. He said, look what Lucy and Desi have done. They own their programs. They have complete control. And Loretta was a savvy businesswoman, and she saw the possibilities in that and went for it. And she said, I'm going to do this because I see that television is a way to get one good idea out in front of the American public every week. And as soon as she did that, the next call that my father got was from Barbara Stanwyck, who also wanted to do the same thing.
Sure. And it was just such a separation, the silver screen from the small screen from television. And then now look at where we are. People are dying to do television. Television is the new, because now television is streaming. It's just, your dad would be smiling, at seeing how this has evolved.
Well, he was excited about the business. And as I said, he'd always find a silver lining. And one of the things also in writing this book that I felt was really important is that people would talk about him and they say, oh, he's the last of a dying breed, or they don't make him like him anymore. And yes, I understand in the broad strokes, but I feel that the skills and the values that he have are still important. And maybe they don't grab the headlines because we live in a very cruel world. But he believed in relationships. People stayed with him for decades because they trusted him. They knew that his word was gold, that he would put in every effort, and he was a positive, enthusiastic person.
Joel, we'll have a link to buy the book, but there's joelbrokaw.com. I guess that's where you can get the book as well.
Sure.
There. Okay, so we'll have that link underneath this video. But I wanted to ask you about a controversial thing. When I think of Bill Cosby, I think of a guy who was so funny, came up dominant in television, had the #1 show, I think, for might have been 10 years. Or 10 seasons anyway, of the Cosby Show. And he also represented sort of this cultural icon from the standpoint of, being the family man and all the rest. Then these revelations come out, some of which I had to think that, people around him must have been aware of on some level. And then he takes this epic fall. Take me through your dad's relationship, the Brokaw family, as you knew Bill Cosby, and then as you saw his rise and fall, if you would, please.
Sure. Well, obviously, this has been a tragedy on so many different levels, from the victims to all the force for good that Bill and Camille Cosby have been in the world. It's all been wiped out by something that, rightfully so, is thought of as unforgivable. But it always was the question I get more than any single one is whether or not my father knew about this. And I can say that by the time his dementia took hold, he was in end-stage dementia when this thing blew up. He knew about some of the infidelities that Bill Cosby had and the paternity suit that happened right after his son had died, because there were contracts that ended up getting put on hold or suspended because of that instance. But he had no idea of the magnitude of the accusations. And I explain in the book in pretty good detail why that was the case. But basically, in a nutshell, my father got I Spy for him. And so he was with him from the very beginning. But by the time the Cosby Show happened, and even before, my father was there to do the big deals. He didn't get involved in the day-to-day nitty-gritty of, when's your plane taking off and who's picking you up. That was left to other people. So he just was in there to negotiate the big deals. And when you have an agent like that, who has integrity, it's something very precious to a client. And so if in any case, I think that Cosby was on very good behavior,
right,
with my father.
He would have wanted to keep it away from Norman.
Exactly, and also, you know, because it's so hard to find someone like that. But also, there was a respect that they had, and my father would never delve into a client's personal life unless the client asked him, say, "Hey, I'm having a problem with this. What should I do?" And he would only be so happy to help out. But that was
it sure, so he was unaware. It makes total sense. That story actually tracks. I mean, in other words, I think that's completely believable and understandable, and it doesn't feel like there's in even one scintilla of BS in there, which you get a lot of around Bill Cosby reps and people who knew him, et cetera.
For sure.
You know, people were aware that he was an infidelitous guy. I mean, maybe epically infidelitous, but the other stuff, which is way, and who knows what the relationship was anybody has with their wife or whatever. So I don't judge in that area, but obviously what he did was just horrifying. Yeah. So the world of Norman Brokaw, of your dad, and show business, was it ever, and this is kind of birthed by that Cosby thing we just talked about, was it ever in that world that we see depicted in some narratives on television and in film, where a fixer has to take care of something for a celebrity? Or was Norman more, hey man, I'm about the business, I have relationships with clients, I put together deals, I think about the future and the career of people, but I'm not in the world of trying to fix somebody's PR problem?
Well, I do mention a couple of noteworthy cases, and one is concerning Kim Novak, who was a top box office attraction, who kind of walked away from the business because she didn't want to play the Hollywood game so much. So like people under 50 years old, unless they're cinema buffs, wouldn't know her. But long story short, my father got the assignment very early on of having to go over to Rome and break up a love affair that she was having with an Italian businessman who was called Count, but he really was a bogus count. And so, you know, and I think about that, it's like kind of like being a bounty hunter. He's going over there because she has a contract with Columbia and the movie's starting up, and she's having the time of her life. And my father shows up at her hotel and bangs on the door. And, you know, the chapter on Kim Novak is one of my favorite ones because I was able to talk to her and hear the tone in her voice. And she regarded my father as her big brother. And sure, he always had that kind of, so she said he talked my language, which meant that she was able to get him to see that, yeah, I guess I could go back and do that movie. And so, but he had a way of being able to handle situations. Another great story in the book is about Tony Orlando. And he became a client of my father's after he had a cocaine problem and was in a mental hospital. And my father had a quick fix for him, which was for him to take a short-term role in the Broadway play of Barnum, which would require Tony to walk on a tightrope. And my father's logic with this was, if the audience sees you walking on a tightrope, they will know that you are no longer on drugs. And it worked.
You know, that guy, Tony Orlando, had an amazing career. I didn't realize that your dad was there to kind of rescue him from what could have been an epic fall.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Pardon the expression. Joel Brokaw, again, the book is Driving Marilyn, The Life and Times of legendary Hollywood agent Norman Brokaw. You and your brother have really, you know, you picked up the mantle. You know, you picked up the talent management mantle. And how would you describe the world of your brother and yourself regarding talent?
Well, I have actually two older twin brothers, David and Sandy, and we worked together for many years. We had like a little boutique PR agency, but our father really trained us well. He gave us a love of the business and a love of people. And we also kind of stepped in, and if we needed to shovel the elephant shit behind it, we would do it because we saw that in our father. But he gave us a love of the business, and we were able to also have decades-long runs with clients. And my one brother David was given a client when he first started off that was called, her name was Loretta Lynn, and nobody knew her, and it was country western music at the time. And just that one client started the whole boom in country music, mainstreaming of country music. So my brothers are.
And Berry Gordy was a client of your dad's, was he not?
That's correct. When Berry Gordy moved from Detroit to Los Angeles, because he wanted to expand the entertainment platform of Motown, he was told to see Norman, and they hit it off. They had a close friendship, and Berry Gordy said in his chapter that Norman had told him that he could see what a client wanted before the client realized it himself, and he sort of thought that that was kind of a little BS or something like that until he started to do it for him. So that, you know, Berry Gordy was a genius, and I think he saw genius as well in my father, and that cemented this extraordinary friendship.
I'm just so taken by his history. It's so wonderful, and it spans all of these changes in show business, but deals with all of these wildly high-profile characters and figures and relevant people in the evolution of show business. Good luck with the book. We'll have a link to it underneath this video. Again, it's Driving Marilyn, The Life and Times of Legendary Hollywood Agent Norman Brokaw. Wow. Thanks, Joel. Great stuff.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate it.
Congratulations, Joel Brokaw.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.